Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today I am with Megan Maldonado. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. And like always, thank you so much for tuning in to the Lift High the Cross podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please introduce yourself for the audience because you haven't been on here before.
Sure. So I'm Megan Maldonado. I am also known as Megievalist, which is spelled Megievalist. It's a made-up word. It's Megan and medievalist because I study medieval literature, specifically English literature. I'm a PhD candidate in English comparative literature, and I also run an X account, formerly known as Twitter. I feel like we still have to say that all the time. I don't know when we're going to stop. And I also have a YouTube channel under the same title. It's also just my name. And what I talk about is medieval stuff, literature, history, and how I see these things applying to day-to-day life. I'm also an LCMS Lutheran. I've been since I was 1 month old. And that's also a pretty big feature in my work and what inspires me and what I focus on. So that's me in a nutshell.
I was about to say, check out our YouTube channel. It's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to first ask you a couple of questions about the subject we're going to talk about, which I think it's really interesting with the medieval history, especially medieval masculinity. This is going to be a fun topic to talk about. But first and foremost, I'd like to ask what makes you so interested in these topics? Because I am a history major. I am starting to get into those classes. I'm starting this fall or I'll be going into my sophomore year, and that's things that interest me. So I'd like to ask you why are you interested in those topics? Because I mean, as Christian young women, I'm always telling them you should be looking into history, being able to learn, see what you see in a man, make sure they're masculine from a Christian standpoint. But what makes you so interested to talk about masculine men, not only from the modern day point, but also back in history?
Sure. So why I'm interested in medieval stuff generally, I had actually planned to focus on something else. I'm an English major, and I was in undergrad and currently getting my PhD in English. And I had envisioned doing creative writing and going more of that track. And I actually didn't get into the creative writing workshop that I needed to. So I took my backup class, which was Dante in English, and went and took other medieval classes after that. And what I've found there and continued to find is that in other classes, maybe in other fields, or just even in English, but beyond the Middle Ages, it can be hard to find a place to comfortably talk about religion in very serious terms as a serious philosophical and intellectual enterprise. And I know that's more of a secular approach, but it felt comfortable. And so as a Lutheran, I feel like I have some distance because I'm studying a period where Roman Catholicism is the predominant religion, right? I mean, Luther hadn't come around yet by the Middle Ages. So I feel like I have some distance. I don't feel like I'm trying to defend anything or feel uncomfortable with the various expressions of Roman Catholicism that I see, but it's still a part of the faith that's expressed in the ecumenical creeds. And so I have a great enjoyment of the literature, and even secular literature, like medieval romances, which brings me to the medieval masculinity piece. So when we talk about medieval romances, people hear the term romance and they think like romance novels. What are some? But the Christian Grey ones, 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight, or, those ones that are in the bookstores all the time. I don't know when you were last in a bookstore. I was in a Barnes & Noble last weekend, and every cover looks like this AI slop of a couple that's like standing and coyly like looking at each other. All the covers look the same. So I'm not talking about those romance novels or novels in general. A romance, it is actually what we think of like King Arthur, different knights of the Round Table, or other knights. Doesn't have to be King Arthur, but we're talking about chivalric, relating to chivalry, chivalric romances, where there is typically a quest. There is a knight or multiple knights. There might be women in there, might not be, but some of these romances are the focus of my dissertation. And what brought me to medieval masculinity, why I have a series about this on YouTube, and why we're talking about it here, I guess. Different reasons. I noticed when I got onto Twitter, or X, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I saw, and I've seen this on YouTube too, a lot of content of these Western civilization and pro-masculinity accounts that are putting a lot of images from the Middle Ages out there. And there's not really a lot of context or background with it, but there's something resonant about that imagery with men online today, at least the men consuming this content. And so when I was seeing this over and over and over and over and over again, I was like, what's going on here? When I'm reading from Andrew Tate, something like, a peasant does this, but a king or a lord asserts his dominance and does whatever. Hearing this from different people, Tate's an obvious example because he's just so popular. I hate to invoke him, but he still remains very relevant. Seeing this over and over again, I thought, what is it about medieval masculinity that seems so appealing? What are we inventing about the idea of medieval masculinity? What are we making up about what men used to be in order to say that we should return to it? And what was it actually like, or how is it imagined to be in the literature? Because of course, literature is not real to life, and even a lot of medieval histories can sometimes be not real to life either. But what's actually there in these texts that's worth looking at and exploring? What does it have to say about masculinity, and what can we take away from it, or what does it make us think about, even if we want to act the same way or operate in similar manners? So I hope I've answered your question. I know it was kind of a roundabout journey from my undergrad years to today.
Oh no, definitely. I want to add on that. I look into medieval history, especially from looking at the standpoints for young men, how they lived, and I was about to actually say Andrew Tate. The first person that raises up my mind when talking about history is Jordan Peterson.
Sure, for sure, yeah.
He definitely annoys me from a different area of Andrew Tate. But anyway, I do like how they're able to tell guys about what it is like to be a man. Obviously, they're not promoting what it is to be a Christian man, but also a lot of these difficult things that young men had to do. We don't even think about that today. I don't think about always trying to find work to put bread on the table, or trying to make sure the roof doesn't fall off the house. I have all those blessings nowadays, so nothing I have to really worry about. The young men from thousands of years ago had to worry about that way more. But as I look more into history, I always, especially from like the high school years, I really appreciated looking at that way, trying to be more of a man from history. The more I looked, I was a little bit surprised, because the more I look into history, the more I'm like, wow, even though we're different culture-wise, we don't really change as people. We're sinners, we're evil. Even all the Roman Catholics from all different time periods, they were evil people. Heck, when Luther was trying to start the Reformation, those guys weren't exactly the kindest when it came to debating or refuting him. They wanted to kill him certain different times. And guys like John Huss, he was actually executed inside of his own church for refuting against the Roman Catholics. And so what I would like to talk about is, what would you say for young men who look into history, guys like looking at Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson? It is good to look into history like that, but I think it can also be an idol to worship. I think it can be a big problem. What's a good way to use history as a positive way, not just in the negative way? Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, you don't want to look at the past, the history. That's all wash. No, we need to do that, but we also need to make sure we're not, worshiping a certain time period, not be like, hey, this one soldier was doing this great thing. Okay, but he was also a evil person. He started burning witches to the stake. Not good things. That's something that always troubles me, because I can always, like my cousin, he likes to talk about the Puritans, and they've done a lot of great things. They wrote a lot of good books. The only problem was, if my memory serves me correct, they started the Salem witch trials. They were a big part of starting those burning women at the stake for being witches, which was an evil thing. So I guess it's not really a question. It's just something that's always has made me realize as I start to wrap my head around learning more history, because when I start to look into things like the Reformation, medieval history, the Roman Empire, those are really cool things. But the more I look into it, I'm like, wow, we're just a lot of evil, a lot of bad, a lot of good, just a little bit of everything.
Sure. So you've brought up a few different, I think, really great points. The question of how do we view people from the past in a right way, where we neither valorize absolutely everything they do, nor do we demonize them and say, okay, we can never look at them or talk about them again. This question came up a lot just 5 years ago in 2020, when we were having this whole racial reckoning in the United States and going back through basically every historical figure that we had in the US. And, there was all the statue burning. But to get more to the topic of this talk, how do you, as a Christian young man, let's say, you or anybody, how do you look at history or read this literature that I happen to talk about and say, okay, what do I take away from this rightly, with the understanding that this is not scripture? I think that has to be top of mind. Are you deep into scripture first and foremost? Are you praying the Psalms? Are you reading the Proverbs? Are you reading Jesus's words? Are you reading the whole of scripture? I think that has to be the starting place, because no, the Bible is not, what was that silly acronym? Basic instructions before leaving Earth. I think that's the evangelical acronym that they came up with. That's not what scripture is, right? So we don't want to read it as a how-to manual in that sense. But we do have the law, and we do have the comfort of the gospel, and there's a lot of wisdom there too. And I think reading the wisdom books especially is something that you've got to be really in. If you're looking for something to read on how to be a great young man or a great young woman. So starting there, so that way you're also keeping in mind when you're encountering other figures from history, when you're reading other kinds of literature, okay, I have in mind what is true and what is this other expression of the human condition, which is any book or I guess bit of history. What new articulation of the human condition, what does this teach me? If I'm reading a story about a man who was born as half a demon and realizes the nature of his half humanity, realizes his whole demonic composition, feels convicted. What does he do? What can I take away from that? Do I learn that I need to go and run to Rome and get blessed by the Pope? No, I'm not in a literal sense, but I think we can read this literature, and certainly young men can read it, young women can read it, or kind of a different perspective, but reading this literature, reading history, and saying, okay, this is inspiring me to look at my own sin, let's say. This is inspiring me to go talk to my own pastor and maybe go to confession if I need to, even individual confession and absolution. You don't have to read literature or history as a one-to-one manual. I'm not sure that anybody does necessarily. It's not really an intuitive way to read, especially something that's super old. But I do think that it's useful to read these stories and to feel moved by them. And everyone is going to walk away with something maybe a little bit different as they read these stories or as they read history. But I think read things slowly. Don't read them as how-to manuals. It's especially important for poetry, and a lot of these old romances are poetry. Read them slowly and read them again, and allow yourself to, I'm not saying be lost in it, but allow yourself to dwell on things. And I think that's another feature of poetry too, is that when you read it and you read it aloud, there's a pace to poetry. There's a rhythm, what we call meter. Allow yourself to hear that. Let the time kind of expand, contract, dwell on it and the ideas that are brought forward, and then take it, you chew on it, and you compare it or you think about it with the context of scripture. And then you ask, okay, and you can even pray, like what wisdom is there in this, if any? And if not, then, throw it out, don't use it. But I think it would be easier to be like a Tate or even a Jordan Peterson. I don't lump them together as if they give the same kinds of advice. They absolutely do not. But they are both secular, right? And it would be easy to be even a Jordan Peterson who has this very roundabout way of speaking, to come back to a story and say, okay, this is what the story is telling you about how to live your life. I don't think it is that simple, but I do think that great stories can prompt us to reconsider our life in a new way. It's almost like not a kaleidoscope, because that distorts everything, but it's looking at it through a different lens, looking at life through a different lens than you otherwise would have. And that, I think, is some of the purpose of why Christ told parables. Now, I'm not equating secular stories to the gospel, but why did Christ tell parables? Why did he give a new story before teaching the thing, or even teaching the thing plainly? Because we are able to see and understand things differently when we have a different perspective, or maybe we feel a little bit distanced from the issue at hand. So I think, roundabout way, I was just talking crap about Jordan Peterson for answering in roundabout ways, and then I did the same thing. But yeah, I don't want to give a one-to-one, okay, here, you read this, then you know how to be brave after you read the story of, I don't know, Galahad finding the Grail. No, you don't know how to be brave, but you do think, as you're reading the Quest of the Grail, okay, why is it that Lancelot couldn't get to the Grail? It was because of his sin, specifically because of his adultery and his sexual sin. If you're reading that and you're feeling convicted about your own sin, or you're having some grace for Lancelot and you think, man, God bless him, like, I am also not worthy, but by the grace of God, he comes to me. I don't have to go out and find him the way that they have to in this story. Now we're having a more complex conversation and view of what it is to be a man and a Christian man. That's a kind of roundabout way of how I describe or recommend an approach, I guess, to reading history and literature from the Middle Ages.
Poetry sounds like someone interviewed Lisa Cooper.
You know, I'm trying to take over that other channel too, but I don't know if we can name it on here. It's a competition, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Something I'd like to talk about is, I think it'd be interesting, and something that I actually thought about today. I think it'd be fun to talk about. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy with how a man and woman should be in a relationship. And a lot of people, guys like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, they like to reference marriages from the medieval history or down the road, and just more how, or even like 100 years ago, and how things were a lot more traditional. And as much as I agree with them to an extent, I think there were far more traditional values, way more Christian values back then. I do think it's also worth mentioning, a lot of people from the liberal side do have a good point of, well, there was a lot of arranged marriages, or there was a lot of forcing marriages back then. I don't think it's as romantic as it is. And also, just like how the modern day movies and TV shows show modern day relationships and how people are sleeping around, doing all these terrible things. But at the same time, you can also look at movies from the medieval ages and how they acted like 100% of the time those kind of marriages back then would work, and probably not. And so what do you think about a topic like that within medieval history? Because I think that's also something that you can look at, and you can kind of sugarcoat it, make it sound better than it is. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Lots to think about. Neither in history nor in the literature do we see everybody being faithful and totally celibate before marriage. So I wouldn't say it's a total reality. There's this idea that people universally were just more pious, at least in the European Middle Ages. And while I could probably safely say, or we could safely say, yeah, pretty much everybody was going to be Christian, at least nominally, at least culturally, and that it's a more accepted public way of life to pray, to worship, to make sacrifices. Is everyone super pious or equally pious or pious at all? I'm not going to say that either. That's a kind of fantasy that gets pushed in the Middle Ages. Like, everyone was Christian back then, kind of like the 1950s. It's like everyone was Christian back then. What happened? I don't know if that's totally true. And so same with marriage and same with sins, right? You don't have all these stories out of Chaucer or out of these romances that I'm describing. I just talked about Lancelot and Guinevere, right? One of the most famous couples from the Middle Ages, and they're famous for their adultery. You don't have these stories with these philandering monks or these nuns and Boccaccio who are all sleeping around with this one gardener who pretends to be mute. You don't have all these stories because these things weren't happening. They're funny because, same reason that memes are funny, because they're things that we kind of commonly understand. So this is a reality, the same way that it's a reality today, just because there were more public rules about litigating behavior, especially sexual behavior, or the marriage process, doesn't mean that people weren't breaking the rules. Obviously they were. How to view marriage with respect to sometimes arranged marriages. There's this idea that marriage was totally forced on women. There were were safeguards to check, at least at the wedding day, that both parties were consenting to the marriage. There is also this idea, and you were talking about, oh, is it less romantic to have either an arranged marriage or a marriage set up because there's money involved? For women, there was no college degree they could go off and get and support themselves financially. There were some jobs that women could have, but even then, like, being taken care of meant that you were probably going to be a wife if you weren't inheriting land and whatnot. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was trying to remember the original point. Right, arranged marriage is romantic, all that. Is it less romantic? I think we have a more prevailing idea that the individual and the individual's wants and needs and sense of romance are much more important today. That I don't think those were largely priorities. I'm not going to say there was no sense of romance, because you absolutely have that romance in the sense of people falling in love and having erotic feelings for each other or attraction for each other, even prior to marriage and prior to sex. You get that, and you see that in the literature too. I just don't know that it was the big cultural phenomenon in that every single story was going to be about that. And so how do we look at marriage and relationships then? And can we take anything away from those and transport them into today's life? I don't know if we want to. And not just because I think like, oh, it was so rigid back then. No, I think because there were also some questionable ethics that we also wouldn't want to adopt, like the, I don't know, different kings that we might value who had all these different mistresses, or even clerics who had a lot of mistresses on the side, Catholic clerics. That again, them being in this predominantly Roman Catholic or predominantly Christian environment doesn't mean that everything they did was great and then we should adopt it. I do think it would be good to adopt the Christian idea of marriage universally, which is that you wait until marriage to have sex and then you have a family, and that would be good for many reasons. But do we need to look to the Middle Ages for that? Not really. I mean, you may as well look to pretty much any other period before the 1960s, at least in the West. So I don't know if the Middle Ages would be uniquely helpful in that. Now, if you are kind of like a Jordan Peterson and you're saying, oh, there's stories about what you have to go out and conquer in order to get the woman and get married and all that. Yeah, if you read those as kind of metaphors for life, like, okay, I'm not literally going out and fighting war, but I have to go out on my own and have some kind of adventure in my life, especially as a young man. I think that's very important from my perspective, not as a man, but to go out and not find oneself, but find one's role to conquer something difficult. Is that the thing that then emboldens you to find a wife today? Sure. So in the literal sense, I don't know that we should look to the ethics of the Middle Ages particularly for advice or wisdom about marriage or dating. But I do think, especially in the literature, maybe I'm biased because I'm a literary person, but I think in the literature, if we read these stories from a more zoomed out and kind of metaphorical way, yeah, I think there is some wisdom to the idea that you need to go out and fight, or you need to go out and repent, because that's a popular subgenre too. Go out and confess yourself and earn your penance, and then you step fully into society. Yeah, these are good ideas from a zoomed out perspective, though, not to be taken as a literal, okay, that's what they did, that's what I'm going to do too. We'd be better if we just arranged all of our marriages. I don't know that we can put the toothpaste back in the tube in that way. So I'm not sure that that's even feasible. Anyway, I'm giving you're letting me lecture here. I think if you need to interrupt me, by all means, go ahead.
No, you're doing all the heavy lifting for me. I was going to go back from a couple of minutes, but then you said arranged marriages again, and it got me thinking about how there's a lot of different podcasts that are trying to expose idiotic women that are, saying, I got to find this perfect guy, and he has to make this certain amount of money. And you could laugh at that, and then you can compare it to, well, women didn't do that back then. But as I was thinking, like, especially when I was reading through Pride and Pride and Prejudice when I was in high school, it got me thinking definitely from the women's perspective. I know a lot of the girls in those books did have someone in mind within the movie, but especially if you or in the book and you look at the sisters or the mom that's really pressuring them to get married, there is a lot of pressure into that. I mean, you could end up with someone you don't maybe are in love with, but I mean, there is a pressure to that. There's a lot of girls in that book where if they don't get married and their father dies, they're ended up being on the street, or they're not able to find anything to provide for themselves. Like you said, they don't have a degree, they don't have any way to support themselves. So it's an interesting thought, because things were a lot tougher back then. But then again, it really goes back to a lot of the traditional values of men need to be providing for the women, providing for the families, and also have this structure of everything. And, that also adds on to feminism, thinking that women have to be providing for themselves and finding this perfect guy, and everything needs to be split down the middle. But it is interesting.
You raised an important point with the podcasts, like what are some of them? Whatever, and is it Fresh and Fit? Is that the other one that I'm thinking of?
Oh my gosh, okay. It's literal brain rot.
It is, and I think this is an important point you're raising. In that, or I'm going to finish the point that I thought of as you were saying it, that there is an unfortunate phenomenon in which it seems to me like there are a lot of people who are, a lot of young men maybe, or men generally, online, I'll say that, big caveat, who see these podcasts, and maybe these guys don't have a ton of experience with women in real life, and they see these podcasts, or maybe they have some, but they're seeing all this different material of these women who really are being found in like a 5-block radius in Miami or like West LA. And then, which I love West LA, I lived there for a little bit, but they're seeing these women who are doing all the, hypergamy, the whole shtick of, I'm going to find a guy who's at least 6 feet tall and makes 6 figures, whatever. And they're thinking, oh, that's how women are. Like, this is what women want, because I'm seeing so many of them say this. And I think it's important. And I know that we're speaking, we're both people who are online, who are putting content online. And I think there's some great online community stuff, especially connecting with other Lutherans. I think that's fabulous. But there's a risk to being too online, especially getting your sense of how relationships work from stuff that's online. And there is certainly a big danger there with pornography too, which is like, this is how a lot of young people are getting acquainted with the idea of sex. And I really hope I'm not going to get you demonetized, or these are not words that are inappropriate to use for the channel. I realize, stop
Send away.
Okay. Listen, we're all grown-ups here, but there's a danger, whether we're talking about pornography, or if we're talking about these podcasts, these whatever podcasts or similar media, if we're talking about romance novels, and that's more on the women's end of things, or shows that are basically pornographic or like softcore. There's a real danger if you are somebody who's a young person, or just a person who is waiting for marriage faithfully, or you are seeking a relationship. Maybe you don't have a ton of experience, you have a little bit, you're not in a committed relationship, you're not in a marriage. There's a danger to getting your ideas about how romance works from this kind of media. And I remember hearing this kind of advice, even with respect to, let's say, adaptations of Jane Austen or other things that aren't at all like explicit material, that seem pretty innocuous. And I do think, if viewed with wisdom, as I was talking about with the literature and the history, you have scripture in mind, and then you're watching these things. I think certain media can be enjoyable, instructive, and in a good way. But there's a danger when you're especially inexperienced with romantic relationships in watching different kinds of stuff or reading different kinds of stuff, and you're not able to distinguish between the patterns you're seeing across that media and reality. So whether or not you're watching a podcast that has actual people that are within a 5-block radius of somewhere in Miami, or you are watching an adaptation of a romance novel, it can be tricky when that's all you're consuming, that's all you know about how men and women interact. It becomes the truth in your mind. And you might say, well, I know it's fake. And I believe somebody who would say, yeah, I know it's fake. And yet, emotionally, especially if you continue to take in this material, emotionally it feels true, even though you wouldn't rationally say, oh yeah, like I'm expecting my man to come at, like, waltz into my life and do some extravagant gesture, and that's how I'm going to know he's the one. Or, I will know that my marriage is good because we will have no arguments and no issues, and because that's what it means to be in a good relationship. If your whole sense of what a good relationship is based off of things that are fake or things that are on a screen, really, it's going to be really damaging for you in ways that you probably aren't willing to admit even to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Don't watch this podcast. Don't look at content. Just
off.
turn everything off. Log off.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I to add on that, I really like what you said about oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. With right, with the female side of it, because definitely, it can be bad for both sides of it. And I can definitely, as a person, definitely through my high school years, I was definitely more into the masculine red pill side of trying to be that guy, trying to go up and try to find that perfect woman, sweep her off her feet and be that guy for her. Obviously, I was way more into the secular side of it. And luckily I've corrected those mistakes. But yeah, I definitely, from the women's side of it, obviously I'm not a woman, so I can't really see their point of view of it. It is a struggle, especially, and we've talked a lot about the masculine point of view of what you're supposed to be doing as a man, what you're supposed to, what are the rules, what are the things that God calls you out to do for a man. And I think it'd be really good if we talked about some of those things. We've talked about it before, things that women are supposed to be doing as well for those things. Like you said, women can find their own types of pornographic ways in their own way, like looking at novels. They could be tempting themselves to putting themselves online in really inappropriate ways, or they can be really ungrateful about what's to come. And even though they're on the side of getting more of what they want, either through physical relationships or marriages, most of the time, if they're more like, most of the time, if they're like, I'm just going to wait, I'm just going to let all this slide by because all the men are coming to me, usually that doesn't happen all the time. And on top of that, something that I figured out, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, I was really going through that stage of not really going through my Bible for support, more going into the red pill side of it. And that was definitely wrong. And so I'm glad I corrected that. But now that I looked at that side of it and I look back at it, it was tough for guys who are definitely trying to figure that out. But the more I realize it, I think women struggle with today's modern age a lot more, because I think now that the internet and social media is trying to cancel men, trying to deprive them, trying to make sure they behave themselves, I think that also motivates not only Christian men, but also conservative men trying to better themselves. And they use that as an energy boost to keep going. Whereas even Christian men, Christian women, liberal women, or just agnostic women in between, I think are tempted more because of the society we're living in, because, they're more free to do what they want. They're encouraged to do what they want. They're encouraged to make a career, and they are discouraged to start anything like a family. And something that I can never really understand, because I'm not in those shoes, but it is really baffling to me, especially for me talking to even Christian girls that I know. And they're like, yeah, I do want to start a family, but I want to make sure I get a degree. I want to make sure I can provide for myself. And obviously you don't just want to be thinking about one thing, either providing for yourself or trying to go out for a career. But it's really mind-boggling. I'm seeing Christian girls that would make great wives, great mothers. And you can tell from what they're getting from either their internet or the podcasts or whatever is being encouraged, something's slightly pulling them away from the traditional values that God's telling them to be. It just naturally doesn't feel right. Kind of like how a conservative man who's not Christian, and they're like, yeah, I know I probably should have one wife, but I'd rather have 6 girlfriends to sleep with. I feel like that's the same way with a woman. I mean, I know I probably should find one man, but I should probably look at my different options. I should get my degree. I should get my own job. I should do all these things, whether you should be looking to the Bible, looking through these different things. And so it's infuriating, because you just don't really know what to do. I was there, but I feel like it's harder for women nowadays.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about what's difficult for men and for women. What often gets lost in the conversation online, and online is a terrible place to look for how the conversation goes, right? Because in real life, I think men and women can talk to each other with much greater ease, but well, depending. But it's okay to say that men have difficulties and women have difficulties, and it doesn't need to be about whose are worse or the same or different or whatever. It's okay to look at these different issues for what they are, and maybe there are some similarities, maybe they aren't. But I have great compassion for men who really socially, the role of the provider and what that means. I think we have a set idea of like only the man used to earn an income, and now he doesn't, or he's not the sole provider a lot of the time, so he's lost his role. That is a place actually where we can look to the Middle Ages, where you would have men and women, wives and husbands, who are both performing different kinds of work. It's not always paid labor necessarily, but the idea that women historically were just sitting in a house, either pregnant or giving birth actively, or
moms don't work.
Yeah, no, it's not even that they're just mothering. There's lots of manual labor. If you're a woman who's living on a farm, you are doing other kinds of manual labor too. I'm saying all this because I think there has been a difficult shift. I'm not sure where exactly to pinpoint it. We can point to the sexual revolution. We can point to industrialization. I think these are just a lot of different factors going into, okay, men now have a new role that's really hard for them to navigate. I'm not saying that as a man, obviously, but observing, men are going to college less than women now. There's a great book by a guy named Richard Reeves, of Boys and Men is the title. Really fascinating study of where men are at, but the different gaps in sometimes employment, but a lot in education, incarceration. What is it that's causing this recession of achievement from men nowadays? Is it the fact that this role that was a little more clearly defined for a while, that men would be financially the providers, that they were strong and protectors? Well, in a society with a robust police force, and probably you're more likely to face like a virtual crime than a physical one, depending on where you live. How necessary is that? How necessary is it to find a man who is going to provide for you financially, when there's really an expectation, at least in the US, for this economy, that you're going to likely need to be a dual income household depending on where you live and your circumstances and whatnot. Some people debate that, I understand, but certainly it's more common today to be dual income. And so you're hearing that as a man, you're like, well, what is my role? Why does a woman need me? How am I going to sell myself on the dating market, let's say? And for a woman, even a conservative woman, and I was raised in a pretty conservative household, very conservative household, depending on who you ask, you're told on the one hand, growing up in the church, okay, marriage is a good thing, having children is a good thing. You're also raised with the expectation, you're in a culture that expects, okay, you're probably not going to marry at 18. People do, I understand, but it's increasingly less common. So are we going to tell young women who can't find any guys who are ready emotionally to hold down a job and hold down a home and be married, okay, yeah, you shouldn't be going to college, you should be getting married young? Who are they going to find to marry? What guys are ready when people, young men especially, are living at home later ages more and more? Right? You're right in saying that there's this tension here, that you are told one thing, maybe like, oh, it's good to marry young and be a homemaker or whatnot, but also you're told, okay, you're probably not, you notice, like, I may not be able to find anybody I can marry right now. I don't want to be a burden to my parents. I should get gainfully employed. Especially women are less likely to go into physical trades for biological reasons and just probably generic interest. It's hard to be told, not just by the culture, but even by your own lived experience. There are a lot of young women, I see this online, I see this in young women I know, that are saying, like, I don't, all these guys, they're either, they're still living at home, not just that, but they have no interest in doing something with their lives. They can't name a goal that they're going for. They have this defeatist mindset when it comes to, the economy is too bad, I'm never going to be able to make it. Of course, this is not all young men, just as not all young women are like the ones that are on the whatever podcasts and whatnot. It's easy to do generalizations when we're talking on the internet. But yeah, I think it is hard to live one way to live in a way that you want, even if that's let's say the ultra conservative, traditional, I'm going to get married as a woman, I'm going to be married young, become a mother really young. Well, how do you do that when you struggle to even find somebody? So, and especially in our synod, well, you're LCMS, correct? You're
Yes.
not, yeah. So it can be hard, right? In dwindling congregation size, that's another factor too for men and women, right? It's hard to find somebody to marry. I had to move across the country before I found my husband, right? In another LCMS church, I had to move 3,000 miles. Okay, like, be bold, and we're talking about adventures and going on them. If you're a young person and it's really important to you to get married to somebody who is of your same confession, which I think is absolutely great and something you should go for, then be willing to go out and find that person. Now, this is a long ways away from what you first asked, which is what should women do? But I think, let me come back to it. Young women, I'm not going to pretend like I know the wisest way to live life. None of the things that I'm just talking about when I'm saying what's either best or what's morally good, none of that is because I am the arbiter of what's good. I'm always pointing back to Christ and pointing back to Scripture. And I have to go there because I am so sinful and because I am so ignorant of so many things. But what I do know is that you should, as a young woman, find women of different ages that are older than you. If you have wise and Christian family members that are women, go to them. If you don't, get involved in a church. Find other women, not just around your age. It's very tempting for young people to want to spend time with other people who are exactly their age and all that, or just near their group. And I get that, and you can and should have those friends too. But find women who are older than you, even much older, and at different life stages. And ask these questions. Like, there's this fear with everything being online, with everybody tweeting out what they heard somebody else say. Like, oh, I don't want to say something stupid out loud or do something stupid. But go ask stupid questions, or what you think are stupid, to other people who have lived more life than you. And this is also part of the beauty of reading old things, but you shouldn't just read old literature without talking to real people. We see stuff in the past, or we read things in the past, and we say, wow, yes, their life was different in many ways, but also I resonate with this very strongly, with this feeling or this scenario or whatever. You're going to have that too with people who are older than you. And they're going to have some kind of input often on what you're going through because they've been through it. Especially young women. If you are finding that you are really wanting to get married, great. Ask wives in your life beyond your family of origin too. And I think including that, especially if you come from a healthy family, but beyond that as well, and ask questions. What should I be looking for? What are some red flags that I should avoid? I have been beating this drum for a while on the internet now, but I think that people should be going to their pastors or calling up other pastors and maybe in neighboring parishes, or maybe even a little further away, and saying, hey, I want to date somebody. Is there anybody similar to my age that you can recommend? I think that going in humility, admitting that you don't know a lot about life, and you really don't. I even do not, and I'm married at this point, but getting wisdom from other people who have lived longer than you and having the humility to listen to that advice. That is the best piece of advice I can give to anybody, irrespective of circumstance. Beyond that, I mean, sometimes people's life situations, yeah, we can get into specifics, but I don't care who you are. If you're a young Christian and you're involved in a church, if you're not involved in a church, get involved in a church. If you are involved in a church, then ask the different men or women in your life, depending on your own gender. Talk to your pastor about these questions that you're having. These are important things. And yeah, it is possible to get a college degree and then get married as a woman. I've done it. Many other women have done it too. I don't think those things have to be in competition with each other. And I do think it's important for both members of a marriage to have necessary life skills in case of even emergency. That's a whole different conversation. But anyway, go find somebody who's older than you and ask them about life and spend time with them frequently, not a one-off conversation for 10 minutes after church, one time. Get to know these people and have friends who are even much older than you. That's my advice for everybody here.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, just trying to find the right woman or trying to find the right man is definitely not trying to say this to sound like woe is me, but from like especially looking through Lutherans, or especially Lutheran men that are trying to find just someone to date, it is pretty hard. I look at a lot of my Reform friends; it's easier for them to date the evangelicals, and it's easy for the evangelicals to date different types because their theology is all around the place. And then you have Lutheran men that are theologically sound. They're like, well, where's the theology sound women? And so that's a very difficult thing too. And I've seen this a lot of times, definitely in my church body, which is sad, but a lot of those people are purposely dating people for a couple of years that aren't from the same church body. And eventually they either switch churches or arguably probably worse, they stay in separate churches. And so when they have kids, they're going to have two different churches, which I think is even worse. And it is very difficult, but I think, like you said, I think a lot of guys that I know that are Lutheran and are buddies of mine, they're like, yeah, I know it's really hard to find the right person, make sure we have the same beliefs, make sure we connect, but all these things are very hard. And I say, well, thank you so much for doing that because it is necessary. It's a very good thing that you're being somewhat picky, not extremely picky, like good looks or whatever, but I mean, picky in the sense of way that you need to make sure you guys connect, you love each other, you're attracted to each other, and most importantly, both LCMS Lutheran, or at least make sure. I mean, if you find someone that's not Lutheran, make sure you talk about it. You never know what God might has in store for you, and you could make something happen from that too. I was talking to a girl a couple months ago, and we were hitting it off. It went pretty well. I was talking to her that I wanted to be a pastor, and I also kind of had that conversation where I know you probably know how difficult it is for a wife being married to a Lutheran pastor. So I know that might be difficult for you. So that maybe that's something to think about. And that's eventually was something that made us walk away from each other, which I'm glad she thought about it because it is something difficult to talk about, especially if someone like me that's considering seminary, that's also something that you should probably mention maybe in the next first few dates, like what I did. Yeah. And so, yeah, definitely it's something that's going on within Lutheran men's heads from like 16 to 24 or even 30, which is terrible. But I mean, those things are necessary. You need to make sure you get them done, make sure you have healthy marriages because it is very important.
For sure. Oh my goodness, you made me think of something. I'm going to say something maybe slightly controversial depending on the listener. I don't know how you'll feel about it. You should tell me.
Fire away.
But I think that marrying outside of your denomination or even let's set different religion aside because I think that's pretty rough, depending on how committed that other person is to their belief system. But I think the rules and the approach should be different and are different for men versus women in the sense that I think it's easier for men to date outside of their denomination than it is for women. Because ultimately, even though you're not her husband right away, you're stepping into a role already as somebody who's trying to instruct or guide in correct theology. And that is going to be a husband's role for his wife to be the spiritual head of household. Yes, it's good and great if his wife is already in the same church body and is not totally ignorant to everything and might actually have great wisdom of her own to give advice to her husband from a biblically informed perspective. What I'm saying is, though, I think I would be more willing to encourage a young man who's like, I met this girl, she's Baptist, but she's interested in coming to this Lutheran church and starting to go with me. I would be more likely to encourage him in that pursuit than if I met a young Lutheran woman who said, I met this Baptist guy and he's Baptist, but he's really interested in Lutheranism, so he's willing to come to church with me. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying I think it's going to be a rougher road for the woman than for the man. And I would be more likely to encourage the young man and discourage the young woman from doing that. That may seem a little picky. Maybe it's not. I don't think it's sexist. No. Maybe it reads as such.
I definitely agree with that because I think going into definitely a man that's wanting to have a healthy Christian marriage, I think definitely right off the bat, if he sees something happening with a girl, I think automatically he's like, okay, I'm going to introduce her to my theology. Obviously, if it's like a non-denom and then a Methodist church, I mean, that's a little bit more simple. But I mean, like Lutheran and a Reformed Baptist church, I mean, that's going to be a lot more aggressive between theology, especially if both of them are deep into their theology and they're preparing for those kind of questions that come forward. I do think it is a lot harder for women, especially if they're especially a Christian girl that wants to get married and have family. I think they can be influenced a little bit easier than the guy. And so, it is a battle, and it is definitely more difficult. I will say, but I do have a couple of guys that are tempted to change just for the sole purpose of, I think God maybe wants me to step in this different direction. And after being good friends for 15 years, being Lutheran for 15 years, it comes to this. I just want to slap them in the face. But
listen, maybe you should.
Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I need to excommunicate him. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really had a good time talking with you.
Yeah, thank you for letting me ramble. I really appreciate it.